Picture a scene. A grand golden courtroom filled with nobles, filled with life. Yet one woman has all life sucked away. Scorned, disgraced, and tossed away by her Prince Charming, dancing to another woman's sway. All eyes on her as the words leave the prince's mouth. Our engagement is annulled. Your crimes are unforgivable, you vile woman. A forged paper. A witness once called friend, now a traitor. Everything forged with lies and half-truths. Sneer of the nobles that they no longer attempt to hide. The new wife's eyes cast a wild sharp sneer with a satisfied smirk on her lips. For a moment her mask falls as all eyes are focused on our disgraced noble woman. Every story needs a villain, and what is one noble woman's life when her downfall shall inspire millions? The noble woman is about to voice a rebuttal, but she catches a glimpse of her supposed allies, who clench their fists and avoid her gaze. Her lips stay sealed. There is no one on her side, both by cold or cowards by choice. The end result is the same. "Have you nothing to say?" shouts the prince. The woman clinging to Prince begs to show mercy, and hatred starts to overwhelm shock. As she opens her mouth, lightning flashes. Memories from worlds unknown flock to her, and for a moment it makes sense. "Guards, remove this woman from my sight," and then laughter echoes the halls, that befuddles all others present. Has the noble woman gone mad? No. For the first time in her life, she sees things clear as day. She is the villainess. It's time to act and play her part. Last year I watched I'll Become a Villainess Who Goes Down in History, and I liked it. So I went to my anime list and noticed an interesting tag: Villainess. My curiosity got the better of me, and what I found was that there were like 10 villainess anime in total. And we get like 3 new ones each year. We get 20 run-of-the-mill fantasy harem male-lead isekais each season, so I had an idea. I've never watched all the anime in one genre, so I made it my mission to watch these, but I would have never guessed how much I enjoyed this little rabbit hole I found myself in. I couldn't find a secret cabal who keeps greenlighting all of these villainous anime, but these anime are interesting in their own right. So let's talk about them. I'm gonna look silly when I post this video and like couple of months later it's revealed that Yakuza were behind the production team that financed I'm in Love with the Villainess. If that happens I can excuse the money laundering, but not getting a second season is too much. What counts as a villainous anime? Any anime where the main focus is on the villainess. Most of the time our protagonist is the titular villainess, but if they're not, then they have to be at least the main character. There are other common tropes like the annulment of the engagement by our prince in favor of the original female lead or another woman. Reincarnation and regression also play a big part, because one of the lifeblood and the inspiration for these stories are otome games and novels aimed at girls and young women. And if you were to write a Median villainous story, it would start with our main character transported into an otome game or a novel. These in turn bring in video game mechanics such as status screens, but most importantly, it sets up the fantasy of what to expect. Princes, nobles, knights and demons, magic and swords. Welcome back, Magic High School battle anime. It's like you never left. Of course not everything follows what I laid out here, and there are some exclusions in the My Anime List tag that I found baffling, but we will of course get to those. There is a lot of history how these villainous stories came to be, and why they tend to be isekais. And I want to recommend Colleen's Manga Rex video about the interesting history behind the villainous games, novels and fanfiction. Go check her video out. If for nothing else, then it's an interesting history lesson. If you want the reason why we got so much villainous media, female fanfiction writers. It's always them. First they saved Gundam, and now they're saving Isekais. Bless them. I actually got inspired by her video and watched Familiar of Zero for the preparation of this video, and it sure was a product of its time. At least it had a rocket launcher on it. 10 out of 10. Truly the grandfather of modern isekais. Also, I'm not the first to point out this, that Villainess anime are spiritual successor to the old Portal fantasies or olden isekais like 12 Kingdoms, The Vision of Escaflowne and Magic Knight Rayard, just to name a few. Great anime where we followed female leads trying to make sense of this strange fantasy world. Then men had to come around and ruin everything. Before going in and dissecting what makes villainous genre so compelling, I have to point it out that the variety we have on this rather small sample size is very diverse. While most of them are pure-blooded isekais, actually 7 out of 10 series here are all isekais. So are you getting tricked into watching yet another isekai? Well, yes, I ain't gonna sugarcoat it. Currently, as I'm writing this, the anime that have released are as follows: Bacarina, Your Dad, Yuri, Speedrun, Doctor Doom, Juni, Banger OP, Girl Boss in Every Life, Tsundere, and literally Marie Antoinette. While the titles are eerily similar and filled with "can I copy your homework, I won't make it obvious" type of aura, but trust me, they are all different and offer a different experience, so they do feel refreshing. Just as you're about to get tired of the totally not Harry Potter high school shenanigans, 7th time loop and Taming the Last Boss hit an RKO out of nowhere and offer a completely different experience. Until Last Boss turns heel and speedruns through the Magic High School arc in 4 episodes. Now you might be thinking, are we just getting the best villainous stories now? Is the future bleak? Not necessarily, since there has been multiple manhwa adaptations and no one has adapted peak yet. By the way, there are insane amounts of webtoon and manhwa all about villainesses. It's absurd, and the line of what counts as an otome isekai is rather blurry. Like I've read one otome isekai that was just our lead getting reincarnated as the evil stepmother from Cinderella. Does that mean that the Disney Cinderella is the first animated villainess story? Maybe not, but what about the direct-to-video Cinderella 2? Anastasia is a main character in that. Does that count? I need to go lie down. Anyway, enough preamble. Let me tell you why I adore the villainous genre. Here we need to ask the important questions. What makes the villainous genre so compelling? How do many of the adaptations play out with the premise? And most importantly, thrills or no thrills? It's thrills. It's always thrills. Now the villainous stories share a few similarities with another fantasy genre you might be familiar with. Getting kicked out of hero's party, and one of the main drafts is exactly the same. Our main character is tossed away by ungrateful sobs, who can't see the value that our main character brings, and because of this, they have to claw their way back to the top, while ensuring that those ungrateful sobs get their just due. We add in motivation that almost everyone can relate to, as if you're ever fired from a company that could not see the value you bring, you hope that they burn to the ground, and that they come crawling back to you, begging you to come back with a fat pay raise. In Japanese context, the company in question is a black company, who first work our lead to the death, literally in some cases. Easy to see why these stories are popular when the fantasy of just being dead is more desirable than work in one of these black companies. It's impressive how villainous stories can spin this same narrative over and over again, and I just can't stop. I get hooked instantly and spend my afternoon catching up to whatever piece of fresh villainous media I pick up. I just keep eating this slop. Affectionate. Another fantasy genre that villainous stories share is the fantasy isekai genre. I mean, most of the villainous stories are isekais, but outside of the method of transportation, which for the record, it's just as depressing here. Trakkun, terminal illness. It's usually not a rosy past life for our main character. The reincarnation as villainess happens during childhood, after an accident, or when the marriage is annulled by the prince. Where the villainous stories differ from your regular isekais is that the conflict feels personal, and that the world is known to a reincarnator or regressor. While male lead fantasy isekai main characters are joyful and can't wait to explore this new world, villainous isekais dread for what's coming to them and want nothing to do with it. This gives all the villainous stories a bit of meta aspect to them. Not all of them, but each one that takes a place in a game or a novel that is familiar to the main character, and there is min-maxing at play. They know that the villainess will meet her doom unless drastic measures are taken. So the call to action is to avoid that by any means necessary, instead of a grander story like saving the world from the Demon King, which to be fair some villainous stories do incorporate as well. This doesn't mean that every villainous anime is some big deconstruction of the isekai genre, far from it, but there are some that toy with this idea a bit further than most. Another big difference, though, is that most villainous stories are mostly written by women for women, and it's one of the big reasons why I find this entire genre of fantasy so refreshing and compelling. It feels like a power fantasy that I'm not supposed to see. There really are gender-swapped versions of all those male-pandering isekais banished from heroes' party stories. Except, villainous stories actually have same-sex harem members. Male lead isekais could never. It's also the same reason why I find Yuri manga so engaging. And as a bonus, there are tons of villainous stories that are unabashedly gay, even in anime. I mentioned certain doom, and that is usually what villainous stories are at their core. To prevent a tragedy that befalls our villainess or to right another wrong. Sometimes you are reincarnated as the original female lead trying to save the villainess, or as a villainess trying to save herself and others. To draw a bit of a comparison, you've probably seen or heard about Rising of the Shield Hero. Now you might be intrigued if you could reincarnate as Multi and make certain that she doesn't screw now for me over, while making sure you, as Multi, don't meet the same fate as her. But the universe is hell-bent on making sure the events of the original story happen. If you think that sounds rad, then you've internalized what makes the villainous genre so appealing. Or take it a step further and reincarnate as a mob character and make sure that Multi gets away with it all. That also works. Let's unpack that original female lead moniker a bit. Because if you are unfamiliar with the villainous anime, you might have raised an eyebrow when I mentioned that. Sometimes she doesn't matter at all, sometimes a lot, in both good and bad. More about that later. In otome circles, the original female lead is the woman who in the original otome game story is usually bullied by the villainess. This is purely for convenience sake, as if you would just call her the heroine, then that would apply to the villainess in these villainous anime as well, and we need to separate those two. So keep that in mind when I mention the original female lead, that I'm not referring to the villainess when I say that. There is a comforting fact about these anime that if the original villainess would have just been more popular and well-liked person if she only had acted nice before reincarnation did its thing. While comforting, it's rather unrealistic as someone who is bound to mingle so closely with nobles. Being ruthless and cold is going to be better in the long run. Even if you look at the more grounded approach of bully getting their dues, even that can be a bit too much, as bullies almost never face consequences of their actions. Sometimes they get their due, but that is rarely ever the case in our boring little world. So you can probably see why the villainous genre appeals to so many people, since as you all know, axe forgets, villainess remembers. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, it is rather realistic that someone giving you compliments can help you make friends, or in the case of some villainous anime, they might allow the villainess to start face their inner demons and become a better person. It is one of the strengths of all these villainous stories that if one person was just kind towards someone, a lot of troubles would have been prevented before they even began. It is why I'm part of Bakarina's harem. Unfortunately, both of these observations do not come without some heavy drawbacks. And I'm not talking about being part of Bakarina's harem. A less optimistic, cynical, and a lot less let's blame the victim look can be found in my criticism section. Let's tackle all of these aforementioned points later, but first, let's see our current anime lineup. and what's unique about each of them, and a spoiler warning. My next life as a villainess, all roads lead to doom, arguably put the villainess genre on the map and introduced villainess genre to the masses. Impending doom, reincarnated protagonist in an otome game, magical high school, reverse harem, prince engaged to the villainess, country pumpkin original female lead, villainess's adopted brother, and much more. All except 2 villainess anime on my list are comedies, and Bacarina starts the trend of comedy hijinks. Katarina herself is a fun character that fumbles her way to the top, and it's a prime example of how little kindness and earnestness will carry you in the long run. Where Bacarina is rather unique is that our transmigrated heroine gets closer for her past self, something that even most of the run-of-the-mill isekais don't bother with. Bacarina also sets up the expectation that no matter what our villainess does, the events of the game will still happen, and it can have dire consequences, and villainess manga and anime are not shy to explore why that is. Another notable highlight is that while there are plenty of reverse harems in this anime, Mary from Bacarina is by far the most down bad. She leaves many gooners to shame. Unfortunately, that's a bit of a smudge against the show, but more on that later. Also, while watching Bacarina, I thought to myself, is Teddy Roosevelt canon in this universe? If not, why is there a teddy bear? I need answers. Tearmoon Empire is not an isekai, but instead a regression, another staple of the villainous genre. Mia Tearmoon is literally Marie Antoinette, or as close one can be, very similar to Bacarina, as Mia tries to avoid separating her head from rest of her body, and the first episode might give you some pause. It certainly did for myself, as I was expecting more of a serious anime, but the second episode sliced my expectations, as Tearmoon Empire is a comedy. I don't mind that, of course, and it does excuse some flaws that I have with it, like why is the guillotine so grand? People's razor, this is not. Tearmoon also poses an important question. Why didn't Marie Antoinette just seduce Robespierre? Would have saved her neck with that, and the terror would have just been Tsundere Robespierre taking care of his rival suitors. 7th time loop. The villainess enjoys a carefree life married to her worst enemy. Is another regression anime, but with a twist. First one is that I'm sorry, some of these titles are long, and much like certain car brand, on her demise, Rise travels back to the past, at the point when her engagement is annulled by the prince. Rise retains all of her memories, and has gotten rather used to this regression business, and on the 7th loop, she bumps into Arnold, the prince who plunges the world into chaos, and who is the reason why Rise dies in each time loop, either directly or indirectly. Out of all the villainous anime I talk about in this section, 7th time loop is my favorite. Rise is by far the most competent protagonist, and her interactions with Arnold are a mix between sexual tension and plain old tension, as it feels that Arnold could kill her one moment and the next kiss her with just his stare. This dynamic kept me on the edge of my seat, and I binged the anime in 2 days. Sorry McCain, but the 7th time loop takes my spot for my 5th favorite anime of 2024. I'm the villainess, so I'm taming the final boss, is what I would call the speedrun the villainess. Seduce the Demon King, any present, glitchless. We get 3 plots in this 12 episode season, and we've got everything. Seduce the Demon King, and save his life and the villainess life in the process. Then we get your typical magical high school with a new original female lead, as this magical high school was DLC to the original game. And finally, a big showdown between the original female lead and the villainess. Akurasu also introduces us the twist, where there are 2 reincarnated characters, and in villainous anime that means that the original female lead is also a reincarnated person. So 2 people with meta-knowledge start to duke it out, and the results vary. Unfortunately, this usually means that the original female lead is a White Lotus. Remember that term for later. Villainess level 99. I may be the hidden boss, but I'm not the demon lord. Takes avoiding the doom aspect to the whole new level, as the entire universe is against our villainess, Jumiella Dolkness. Yes, her last name is Dolkness. Can you guess what type of magic she wields?
Darkness, everybody!
Yumiella uses her meta-knowledge to level up to level 99 very early in the story, and she tries to save herself by helping the original female lead in vanquishing the Demon King. Just couple of small problems. In the game, Yumielle is a hidden boss, and she faces a certain doom by the hands of Alicia. And second of all, this universe makes certain that these story beats hit, even going as far as mind controlling Alicia. This show also sets up that in some villainess stories, the villainess is not popular, and might even be hated before the actual story starts. It's also a comedy, and a pretty funny one at that. I'll Become a Villainess Who Goes Down in History was my first, and it holds a special place in my heart. What makes this one special is that our villainess Alicia tries to be a villainess but in a way that improves lives of everyone around her, including the original female lead. While this doesn't make her that many friends, it does catch the eye of the main love interest Duke. Just like Yumiella, Alicia wields dark magic, and does not skip training. Rare villainess anime, where the villainess actually does morally great deeds. I'm in love with the villainess is our jury rep for this section. I know, contain your excitement everyone. Wata Oshi is also unique. Our reincarnated lead does not reincarnate as villainess, but as the original female lead, and she is gay for the villainess. Much like Akurasu and level 99, the universe makes certain that the story follows the game, as while our villainess Claire stops the bullying quite fast, she is still marching towards her certain doom, and Rae, our reincarnated original female lead, is doing everything to stop that. I should mention that the original light novel author wrote Rae with her partner in mind, which makes it even funnier. I do wonder what's going on in that household. The most heretical last boss queen, from villainess to savior, is an interesting case. The original bride in this world was a proper sadist. Like we've talked about bullying before, but what Bride did before our story started was just on the next level. This is of course what happened in the game, and our new transmigrated villainess thankfully can change all of that. As you might have guessed, this is more a dramatic take, but I want to leave the specifics to the patch section. I liked it, but oh boy, do I have several big problems with it. Except the opening. What a banger. Also the character designs are top notch, and thanks to the detail on every character's hair, you can tell all of these knights and maids apart thanks to how unique they all feel. Some of these mob characters look better than some male or female leads in other anime. From Bureaucrat to Villainess, that has been reincarnated, the most recent entry in this list, and bit different than most, as this one takes the meta aspect to the next level. Your dad gets reincarnated as a villainess and hilarity ensues, that pun's included. Along with my next anime, that villainess brings out the real world in a greater focus, as other characters, in this case Kensaburo's family, controls the game their dad has been reincarnated in. Surprisingly low stakes fun, and you get a full history of villainess anime. Take it away, Kensaburo and Mitsuko.
ガラスの亀 P、姫川あゆ P やエースを狙 P のお蝶富士 P、そして悪役といえばキャンディーキャン P。
王家のモン P もマシン英雄伝ワタ P もラムネ&フォー P もリアタイよ。レイヤー P や不思議 UP12 コッピーだってバッチリ履修済みなんだから、オタクの早口信頼しかない。
Last but not least is Endo and Kobayashi Life, the latest on Tsundere villainess Lieselotte, which oh boy what a title. If you thought that Dad villainess was a bit cheeky with its meta, then you're not ready for Tsun Lise. Our two leads, Endo and Kobayashi, pick up an otome game and begin live commenting on the events of the story, which reminds me of something.
Ooh, kill the Captain Alexi!
Then in a twist, one of our characters, the male lead Siegwald, can hear our two commenters who bless him with the information that the villainess Lieselotte is not a cruel noblewoman who looks down on everyone, but a very big tsundere. Sometimes you need divine intervention to make sense of these tsunderes. The story plays with that, and it takes so many twists and turns that I won't be spoiling anything else. Except that Fine is a hardcore.
Everybody knew got knows kung fu.
So those were all the anime that my anime list tagged as Villainess anime that have aired as I'm writing this video. And oh boy, that was a lot. I've talked about what makes Villainess stories compelling, and you might think that there is no hair left undrilled for a Villainess story to explore. But that is not the case. It feels like every week I pick up some new Villainess story that plays around with the tropes in a unique way. And my current favorite is even monsters like fairy tales. Anime when? Please someone. I must emphasize this, that even on this very short list, the uniqueness of each one shines through, and I must commend the various creators that they can give their unique spin on the same premise. Like if I was talking about some fantasy isekais, I would be rolling my eyes and making snide remarks how, oh boy, there is another adventure guild, or, oh looky here, our lead has multiple women in his harem and he has barely started his adventure. Am I biased? Yes. But remember, there is no I in based. Well, that was the ripple joke. But all this talk what makes Villainess anime good, we do have to talk about the bad aspects, as I've already alluded earlier. And it's not all rosy, and let's go from what I find least offensive to what makes my blood boil. Now I assume you have eyes. Good, then you have probably noticed from all these clips I've been shoving up your face is that the animation can be rather subpar. If you want a drinking game, then take a shot every time you see these CGI carriers in any of the anime. You'll be chucking them down faster than Churchill. Bad animation is rarely a deal breaker for me, as I've enjoyed anime like My Daughter Left the Nest and Returned and S-Rank Adventure, and I have very high tolerance for, let's call it clever animation. Characters just standing still while talking to each other, cutting the scene in waistline so you don't have to animate legs, reusing the same stills or hiding our characters' mouth when they speak are clever ways to save time, and in some cases they add mystique to our characters. Because of that, I don't want to dwell on this point too long, and it's not like there is some great animation to be found here. Most of the anime here are pretty to look at, and there is some outstanding animation, like this scene in 7th Time Loop, or the entirety of the most heretical Last Boss Queen. When I sit down and watch anime, the story and the characters and their interactions matter more to me than how well the fights are animated. But I must admit that having good animation is a plus, and even I have some limits. Of course, this is not to say that these anime are not visually pleasing to look at, with their beautiful character designs or background art, even if the animation might be taking few shortcuts. What does miff me a bit more is that in the Villainess anime, the villainesses are rarely the villain they could be. Outside of I'll Become Villainess who goes down in history, where Alicia actually fully intends to play the villainess role, and other characters resent her for it. Or I Am in Love with the Villainess, Claire definitely tries to act like the proper villainess, but joke's on her, Raya is into that shit. Most of the time, whenever a villainess tries to act like one, it turns out they were justified in their actions. This works because most of the anime here are comedies. It's a joke in itself that Bacarina could not pull such a villainous plot, because she is daft, and everyone knows it. But I just want to see some gatekeep, gaslight, girl boss action. Another point to consider is that since these are isekai stories, our villainess main character knows that if they act like the villainess, their head gets separated from their body real quick, or the original villainess was such a sadist that the modicum of human kindness would make you appear like a saint. So it's in their best interest to act cordial, even when the outside world treats them like shit, like for example in Villainess level 99. So I've come around this trope, as I thought I would have disliked it more. But when you strip it to bare bones, it does have a positive message of kindness will be returned in kind. But it does veer very close to the savior trope, when our main leads suddenly realize that this villainess just needs him to fix her. But overall, this trope is a victim of the upcoming points I have lined up. Unfortunately, the Villainess anime suffers from a terrible disease called Characters other than the leads are all idiots. This includes the male lead, and surprisingly sometimes even the protagonist. Looking at you, Bakarina. Kidding aside, this mostly relates to the original husband character, who annuls the engagement to the villainess. They are so short-sighted that someone can whisper sweet nothings in their ear and convince them that they are better off with someone else. It doesn't help that most of the cast outside of the villainess, the male lead, and if you're lucky, the original female lead, are two-dimensional characters who have at most one quirk to them, or they lose their defining trait and fall madly in love with the villainess, rendering them stupid. Sometimes there isn't even a second well-written female character in these stories, unless it happens to be Yuri, but even that is not a safe bet. In short, these dicks think with their, well, dick. Thankfully, this is not that prominent in anime adaptations, and it's more of a manga, webtoon and manhwa issue. But you have might picked up that I mentioned someone whispering sweet things in someone's ear. We will get to that, and it's unfortunately in the really bad section. Look forward to that. I also want to point out that Stale from the last Heretical last boss can teleport. Keep that in mind. The next point could be summed up as my issues with the most Heretical last boss queen, from Villainess to Savior and other Villainous anime, but mostly last boss queen. I swear I liked. What is prominent, however, is the abusive biological parents or family members or by our male leads that more often than not get off scot-free in universe and outside of it. It's surprising how common this trope is, even in the villainous anime that are comedies, and it usually goes like, oh, the girl we abused for our whole life starts acting nice. Well, why didn't she do that sooner? If she only acted nice regardless how we treated her, we would have not abused her that much. Fuck that. This point also has a sibling, where the parents are not physically abusive, but are neglectful, and leave the villainess to be raised by someone else. It's just as terrible, and fuck Hanebado. If I ever want to examine that trope more closely, you will be the prime target. It's also safe to say that the classic evil step-parents exist here as well, but what I found is that stories that do depict evil parental figures, the forgiveness is only reserved for the biological parents, no matter how deadbeat. They might be step-parents, but there is no step-punishment. Wrapping this back to the villainous anime, and I would argue that no one is born a villainous, outside of original pride, and the physical and mental abuse and or neglectful and strict parenting gives our villainess ample material to lash out at the nearest target that she perceives to be below her. And because our villainess is a noble, and the heroine happens to be a commoner, so there's your easy target. To give out two examples, let's talk about Pride from the most Heretical last boss. Before a main character is transmigrated, the original Bride was a menace, like a proper sadist, even before the story properly kicks off. So much so that her mother, the queen, has already given up on her, and completely neglects her and even hides away her second daughter, so Bride can't get to her. It stops there though, as she is completely aware how terrible she is, but doesn't take any actions to combat that, and lets the maidservants and guards take the brunt of Bride's abuse. But that's related to my next point. Another example is Grace from That Villainess. Grace was a cheerful little kid until her courtship began, and she turned to this bully. Now who put her under this strict regimen? Her parents, who you might be led to believe are snotty nobles, but no. Grace's dad mingles with the staff, is cautious, and is not afraid to interact with commoners. And Grace's mom, who possibly put her under this training, is not really part of the story, until the very last episode, where she is completely in love with her daughter, that you have to wonder what made the original Grace this monster that the game depicts, or, more accurately, why did Grace become a monster when all the other nobles are nothing like her? Well, she is the villainess, and you need a bully. But what the original game lets us know about her fate veers very close to my really bad point. But before we move on to that, let's talk about what I found to be the second biggest fumble of many villainous media. You've probably noticed that the villainous genre has a, let's call it a fascination with royalty. So it's rather peculiar that there isn't a critical look on how the noble environment shapes our villainess. The annulment of the engagement and the big court scene I painted to you at the start is one of the biggest offenders to this. Like, what noble actually cares that our villainess bullied a commoner? More so, why are these nobles okay that some commoner is now engaged to the crown prince? While certainly a juicy talking point and something that nobles can gossip over tea and biscuits, but bullying commoners is a national sport for the nobility. They wouldn't give a shit, and most likely double their bullying until morale improves. I don't want a full-blown deconstruction or tearing down a monarchy, but at least some self-reflection from authors would be welcome, that casting out the one bad apple is not going to fix the issues that the commoners actually face, or that would be the one way to bring down the Demon King at the end. Nobility is such a front, and rarely if ever does any of these villainous anime question the nobles and the need for monarchy, which is funny, because some of their dooms are met at the hands of the revolutionary mob, even if that mob is spearheaded by other nobles, like in Tearmoon Empire. At worst, villainous anime say that if the correct people are at the top, then everything is hunky-dory, but most often than not, villainous anime just want the handsome princess and pretty Victorian dresses. I actually don't know if I'm referencing the right time period. Fuck it. It's modus operandi for the villainess to get back or keep her absolute power, and not to overthrow the entire system that made her, her parents, the princess, and the people the way that they are. This is doubly egregious when we are talking about transmigrated character instead of a regression. At least when it comes to regression, our characters don't have the knowledge and introspection we have in our modern world. Sure, it's the same for many fantasy anime, Isekai or otherwise, but at least they don't plop you into the middle of a totally not French Revolution. You don't have to explore that too deeply, but it's amusing that in the anime we've currently got, none has. Heck, even Familiar of Zero did that, and that was just goon in half the runtime. This also leads to many scenarios where basic human decency is treated as an olive branch from the nobles to commoners. Last Heretical boss, once again, is a good example here. Remember when I told you that keep in mind that Stale can teleport. Stale gets forcibly bought from his family by the king to be Bride's new stepbrother, because he has magical talents. This is something that nobles do, and they supposedly pay handsomely for the families, but as a kicker, these children cannot keep any contact with their families as long as they serve. Stale tries to escape multiple times and is constrained until he forms a filthy contract with Bride, giving her a total control over him. In the original timeline this is even worse, and Stale signs a slave contract instead. But in this supposed better timeline, do you know how Bride tames Stale and this whole scenario is given a happy ending? Stale's mother can write one letter each month to him, and Stale can write one letter back once a year. You heard me right. One letter per year. You can teleport, Stale. Go see your mother. No one will ever be none the wiser. And this is seen as mercy by Bride towards Stale. I reject that shit. This still fucking sucks. And it is only Stale that gets this special contract. As a side note, not really related to my point, but I wish some parts of the original Bride would influence our transmigrated Bride judgment and would offer these seemingly more generous options instead of downright execution. Stale's situation was not the first, as we've come to understand that other people might come to resent him and his mother because they got a special treatment. Another harem member, Arthur, is someone who can heal crops and wounds, but instead of becoming a healer, he instead becomes a knight and a personal bodyguard of the new queen-in-waiting Bride, while there are poor people that still eat rotten apples in the streets. It is like the nobility monopolizes the quality of the crops, and this miracle healer can't help others because he is too busy guarding the queen. Vale's initial faith seems rather merciful, but it backfires hard as we see that he has nowhere to go but back to the slums, and the lowlife here will just take whatever he has, and he cannot fight back, because even if they are poor thieves, they are still people of this country, and well can't protect himself or those close to him, which forces him to make a desperate playas towards pride, turning criminals into loyal subjects that before that were at best serfs, at worst slaves. I could definitely see a moment where someone calls this out and incites or even leads a rebellion towards the nobility, and while the nobility and the army are on Pride's side, they must come to terms that they protect the power of the nobility, not the people. Gilbert does call out this contradiction with Pride and Stale, but by being so underhanded he comes off as a villain, and once Arthur heals his fiancée, Gilbert is fully on board with Team Pride. Having original Pride influencing these actions subconsciously would make for a great twist. I'm sort of harsh on Last Boss, because unlike others with the same kind of failings, other Villainess anime are mostly comedies, while Last Boss leans more on the drama. And if the show wants to take itself seriously, then my mind starts to think about these small things, instead of just brushing them off. I also want to say that it's fucked up that they didn't break Val's slave fealty contract by the end of the season. Is it contradicting that I don't mind the same tropes in a comedy like Baccarina, but do mind them here? Maybe. But this type of observation is more excusable in a comedy, as you are not supposed to think too hard on it and just go with, heh, Baccarina has himbaris. Anyway, let's start talking about one really unfortunate aspect of these villainous stories. Unlike most of the power fantasies, villainous stories share a surprisingly a similar trait to many of these other male lead fantasy stories, but in a bit different shade. Internalized misogyny. What does it mean? Well, on the lower end, this just means that there is one well-written female character, and other female characters, even the main female antagonist, are usually one note, and even some female harem members don't do anything. Characters like Mary from Baccarina turn horny on main real quick, and she turns so fast that she loses her other attribute as a green thumb once she joins the harem. But that's preferred to the other end, where the original female lead is a mastermind behind everything, and even if she isn't, she gets by far the worst punishment out of everyone, disproportionate to her actual actions. There is an even term for that, White Lotus. Did you remember that? That's how prevalent the original female lead was evil all along is, and like ogres, there are layers of consequences to it. Some villainous media do try, when the original female lead is forced to commit evil deeds by the patriarchal society or by her abusive family or peers. But on the lazy side, she is just evil, because the villainess no longer is. The crown prince, who annulled the engagements, and other male leads that all talk shit about the villainess, slap in the wrist compared to what women get as their punishment in these stories. I didn't break our engagement or insult you. It was the alcohol, I swear babe. I can change if you just forgive me, where it is happening at least 5 times. Everyone, except those close to the villainess's proximity, tend to also be pretty shallow. Even the original female lead usually just wants a man, you know, because that's what all women want, and that is how the story went. Seriously, some of them are comparable to Spear Hero in depth, and they still manage to have less depth than that rusty iron pokey stick. Of course, this can work like in I'm Taming the Last Boss, but when it comes to anime, that is currently the only one with a White Lotus, so it feels novel, but oh man, you should read some of the webtoons or novels. I should also not leave this unsaid. The women that cross the villainess, justified or not, get treated absolutely trash by the community. This is a wider problem, and definitely not unique to the villainous genre, but it bears repeating that female characters tend to get way more shit compared to their male counterparts for the same action in and outside of the universe. Thankfully, the villainous anime dodged the worst parts of this aspect. I'm just future-proofing this video, as this is more prevalent in light novels, manga and webtoons. But what definitely happens in anime is that other female characters, and men too, lose their agency after the villainess sorts them out. For example, Tiara from last Heretical boss becomes an absolutely nothing of a character after Bride gets reincarnated. Even the Queen loses her only defining character traits, being a bad mother. Only one female character can shine in these stories, and it's the villainess, sadly. If you want something that breaks this mold, and really dives deep into the common tropes of villainess and even Isekai stories in general, then I highly recommend manga, even monsters like fairy tales, or the webtoon Kill the Villainess. Heck, even Maria, the original female lead from My Next Life as Villainess, is one of the better characters in that show, and she has other things to worry over than just Bacarina, which was perfectly shown in that one episode where our gang were trapped in their dreams. Once again, I want to iterate that I'm mostly talking about media other than anime here, since anime adaptations have been leaning towards more comedy rather than drama. So if you want to pick up any of the Villainess anime, you don't have to walk on eggshells and wonder which of the sweet candies is filled with Shield Hero spice. Perhaps Villainess stories need to really examine this trope, but as most of his stories originate from Japan and South Korea, then I would end it with just the old saying, art is a mirror of reality. I call this out, not because I can't separate fiction from reality, or that it somehow escaped me, that most of these are just escapism and fantasy aimed for girls and women. I think it's important to point this out, because it is healthy to discuss these topics, and when pointed out, they might make your past experiences with these pieces of fiction feel sour in retrospect. Then you can look inside yourself and ask, why pointing out these perspectives made you have the reaction you did, and do I look at these works differently now and in the future? Really find the villainess within yourself. So do what a proper villainess will do and comment below calling me an idiot. I don't want to end this video by talking what I found disappointing in this anime. So I want to talk about an anime that I would definitely have not watched if I didn't go on this journey. Especially one of them became one of my favorites. To set it up, I want to talk about villainess anime that are not tagged as a villainess in my anime list, but do share some of the same otome tropes. I call these villainess adjacent anime. Actually, I'm surprised that my favorite of the bunch is not tagged as a villainess anime. But oh well, I should give you another spoiler warning, just as courtesy, but I will be talking broadly of the first two before diving deeper to the last one. Dr. Elise is an anime about, the title gave it away, but what makes Dr. Elise interesting is that she was your typical villainess in her first run, but once she was burned at the stake, she devoted herself to save lives. By a miracle, she is transmigrated to our world and becomes a doctor, and after dying once again, poor girl can catch a break. She returns back to her original world with her original family still alive and well, determined to set the record straight and save everyone with her peerless knowledge of ills and terrible, terrible handwriting. She is literally me. I guess this is not included in the villainess tag because there isn't really any focus on the villainess. Even if Elise definitely was one before the story started. It is talked about in the otome circles though, so that's why I've included it here. Why Raeliana ended up at the Duke's mansion is another interesting case. This one actually has nothing to do with villainess, since Raeliana transmigrates into a character whose death is supposed to kickstart the actual story, and the original Raeliana was never a villainess, just an unfortunate victim. The season is spent on Raeliana avoiding her doom by making a deal with the Duke, and the story does share a lot of blood with the villainous stories. That's why I wanted to shout it out here. So I went on a bit of a rant about my least favorite aspect of villainous media, and I want to ask the following question. Is there a villainess or even an adjacent anime that tackles on my gripes? Good, consistent animation actually shows how terrible monarchy and nobility can be. Anime that doesn't paint the ex-husband or male leads as some dumb idiots. Shows parents that do want good for their children but have to make difficult decisions because of their status, and several well-written female characters to accompany our female lead. Well, I'm glad I asked that, and I'm glad that I started working on this video, because I found an anime that is absolutely one of my recent favorites, because what I found after my long journey was the magical revolution of the reincarnated princess and the genius young lady. That title is a mouthful. So, Machirevo is a story about our lead who is transmigrated as a crown princess Anisfia, a character who creates wondrous magical tools that look like appliances from our world, lightsabers included. She wants to become a witch, but as it turns out, she can't use magic at all in a world where magic is the sign of nobility. In this picture enters Euphilia, betrothed to Ania's younger brother, the future king Algard, and those two enter our story in your typical villainous fashion. Algard declares the annulment of his engagement to Euphilia, since he intends to marry a commoner Laini. It's on this moment, when the whole world is crashing around Euphilia, that Anis literally crashes the party, observes the situation, and snatches Euphilia, flying away with her on her magical broom and claiming her as her own. I love this scene. So why isn't Machirevo tagged as a villainous story? Honestly, I don't know. Especially when 7th Time Loop is tagged as villainous story as well. Anyway, that is not important. Machirevo aired in winter 2023, so it's a very recent anime, and it aired a couple of months after Lycoris Recoil. And if I were to describe Machirevo, it would be Chinatsu and Takina from Lyco team up in a fantasy world to fight dragons, create magical devices, and try to run a kingdom. Oh yeah, Machirevo is also a full-blown Yuri anime. So what does Machirevo do right? A lot of things. We have a stellar animation, from your bombastic fights without forgetting the little touches. I alluded earlier that Anis and Euphilia have a great chemistry together, along with Anis's friend Tilti and maid Ilya. The original female lead Laini is an actual character in this, and without diving too deep into spoilers, it made sense why nobles were ready to discard Euphilia for her, and Algard the prince is not stupid. He made this decision because his goals were grander than that. Sure, he went about it on the wrong way, but that's because the pressure put on him after his big sister gave up her right to the crown. The king and queen do care for both Anis and Algard, but the weight of the crown is heavy, and when you play the monarch game, you have to make decisions that go against your own wishes and morals. The nobles are properly sleazy, who only care about holding their own power, and that is best shown at the beginning of episode 9. I'm not spoiling you, but this was one of the most disgusting things I've witnessed in a villainous story, but I'm glad that Machirevo did not shy away from depicting such a scenario. As a bonus, Machirevo also does not shy away from examining some Isekai tropes as well. I love this kind of introspection from stories, and Machirevo is not only one of the best villainous anime, it is one of the best Isekai anime, period. And think I know what's coming, Machirevo keeps throwing curveballs at the viewer. I love it. Go watch it. Buy the light novel, so we get a second season. But is it better than 7th Time Loop? Don't make me choose, so I'll use a cop-out and call them equal. They both scratch a different itch. So what's next for villainous anime? Perhaps a second season for all of these not completed works I just talked about. Lol, lamao. Keep dreaming, buddy. I was going to put a lack of second seasons to my gripes list, but that's not really a unique fault of the villainous anime. Even if you sell enough Blu-rays or the anime is well liked, that doesn't guarantee a second season. Bocce the Rock just got a second season announcement, and initially there wasn't going to be any plans for a second season until it became a smash hit. You can do good numbers, great numbers even, like in the case of Akebi's Sailor Uniform, and still have a second season in the limbo. Man, I should do a video about Akebi's Sailor Uniform. There are of course confirmed adaptations of villainous media that haven't aired yet, so I can't really talk about them. I purposefully didn't seek out the original works of this upcoming anime because I'd rather wait and see them in animation. We are getting one done by Studio Doka Kobo, and I'm certainly excited for that one. Earlier I joked about Tiger coming in, and manhwa and webtoon adaptations in general, but perhaps in not too distant future we might get to see a South Korean animated works of South Korean webtoons and manhwa. The villainous genre is very saturated in that market, and there are some gems buried there. My hope is that a South Korean studio creates an adaptation of Villains Are Destined to Die, or some other high-profile villainous webtoon, and it turns into a smashing hit. Penelope, my beloved, you can make me worse. That's the hypothetical future, but where to get your anime kicks if you run out of villainous anime to watch? Well, there is the I got kicked out of Heroes Party subgenre that does scratch the same itch, but the quality really varies, and I have only liked one. There is however another subgenre that's the Saint getting disposed of her position subgenre of fantasy, which would also be a place to look if you crave more villainous-like stories. But that particular subgenre has even fewer anime than the villainous genre. There are like, what, 2? And all of the Saints are voiced by Yui Ishikawa. Will the villainous anime become oversaturated as time goes on? Certainly yes, but currently there is no better time to dip your toes in. As for myself, this video took way too long to make, and I'm not talking about having to watch tons of anime and trying to form a coherent link between all of them. I procrastinated way too much, and having almost 30 seasonal anime to keep up with limited time that I could have spent on this video. Turns out though that I'm dumb, and I've already decided to slowly start work on an even bigger anime related project. Anyway, thank you for watching, have a good one, and watch Apocalypse Hotel. You know, this got me thinking, that why are all these nobles so good looking? Where is my Charles II of Spain looking motherfucker?